Hey everyone, Jeff here, also known as the Revit Kid. Today we're going to be talking about physically based rendering materials, also known as PBR. For those of you that don't know, it's actually possible to use physically based materials in Revit as long as you're using 2019 and 2020. Before I jump into the tutorial, if you enjoy this video and the content on this channel, please subscribe to me on YouTube and check out some of my other content. Also check me out at therevitkid.com for old and new tutorials, blog posts, etc. So let's jump right into it. So what I have here is a sample model that I created, and what you're going to see in the sample model is that I have cubes, and those cubes have the same exact material applied. One of them is using the old school technique, which would be considered bump maps, which is really just a texture and a bump map, and the other cube is using the PBR, which is the physically based rendered materials. For the renderings themselves, we're going to be using Enscape, so let me just open up Enscape and give you a sense of it. So with physically based materials, what you get is, instead of just simply using an image and a bump map like you normally would, so if I pull up this here, normally we would use something like this for our texture, and then something like that for our bump map in Revit. And that's all it was. And that tells you the height and what it looks like. And so if you look at this brick, for example, if I zoom in and let it render for a second, you'll notice that the material on the right, which is actually our physically based rendered material, versus the material on the left, the one on the left is definitely more artificial. It's trying to use bump maps to make something realistic, whereas the one on the right is using actually physical based channels like reflections and bumps, but they're called normal maps, to actually create what's there. So what I did here is I made a couple examples. I did a brick, so I wanted you to see a couple, how that brick looks. If I go over here, you could see we also have a wood plank. And for this wood plank, I made it a little reflective on both sides just so you can see it a little better. But if you look closely to the one on the right as it renders, you can see there's much more detail in the wood grain. It has a much more realistic feel if I get closer to it and let it render a little bit. Look how nice that looks. Whereas if I go to the original on the left here and I let it render, you'll see the difference between the level of detail and how it actually pulls through. Over here I went in and I did a travertine or some sort of tile. I think it was marble, I'm not really sure what it was, but either way. And you can see on the right, this one not as big, not as bad. As you can see, the more bump and the more variation in the surface, the better it's getting. But even the reflections, if I go back and forth a little bit and let it render out, you'll start to see the reflections look a little better. If I go in here a little bit. Back here we have my this dude serenading a woman who's completely uninterested. Just having some fun with Enscape there. And then finally metal panel. And this one actually you can see a big difference in how bump is treated. So let me get a nice... So on the right hand side you can see there's this metal panel. It's got a little bit of a stipple in the reflection. It's got some up and downs. It looks pretty nice. And you can see even the reflections are going along with this corrugated look. But on the left, even when you try and get reflections, you're actually just getting this weird, almost carpet looking material. Because that's a really tough material to fake using just a bump map. So that's the difference between using a physically based material and an old school quote-unquote bump map. So how exactly do you make those? So what I wanted to do was go through the process of showing you old versus new. I'm going to recreate these this wood plank. So here's my material block. If I go into my materials, this is going to be the old school way. So what's the old school way? I create a new material. I'm going to call this wood plank old school. And then in my appearance, I'm going to simply add an image, which is going to be, if I go to the wood plank, it's going to be this. Actually, let me make it a little larger. It's going to be this here, right? This is our texture. Let me pull this out so you can see it. So there's our texture. If I go into the family here, I might want to change the size of this a little bit. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 5 planks. So maybe this is more like 30 inches. Maybe there's 6-inch planks. So you can see there's our texture there. And then we probably want to put some bump on it. So I'm going to use one of the channels that we were given here, which is either AO for ambient occlusion or our rough. So we can choose either one. I'm going to choose rough for now. I'm going to make sure that this is 30 inches, click apply. And if I crank up the bump, you could start to see kind of what's happening. Maybe I'll change the scene to something a little different. The torus, ooh, that's kind of rough. Let's try cube. There's the cube. So I think you get the idea. There's the object. So you see what's happening. And that's how we normally and would always create materials and custom materials in Revit. Now we have the ability to create these physically based materials, but you have to start with the right material type to do it. So if you've seen any of my videos on custom materials in Revit, what you'll know is that I always talk about trying to start with the same type of material that you're creating. So if you're creating brick, you might want to start with the brick material in Revit. The same goes here, but you have to be very specific about what you choose. So I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it wood plank PBR 1 because I think I already have a PBR. And now under appearance, I'm going to replace this asset. So I'm going to replace the appearance asset, which pulls up our asset browser. And now I'm going to go down, I'm going to look for wood. And what you'll notice, if you look closely, is that some of these materials have a little green or a little orange exclamation point, and some of them do not. If you hover over the ones that have an orange exclamation point and you hover over that, it says, for improved rendering, use a newer version of the appearance asset instead of this one. So if I choose, let's say this mahogany, which does not have the exclamation point, and I replace it, you'll notice that our asset area changed completely. Let me show you that again. I flip it out. Here we had generic reflective transparency bump. Now if I flip in the new one, you can see we have parameters, translucency, emissivity, and relief pattern bump. So that's how you know that you're using one of the new ones. Now for the sake of not having any headaches, we want to duplicate this asset. If you don't know why you're doing that, then head over to my blog, or I'll link it below, a tutorial about double duplicating your materials. And I'm going to call this wood plank PBR. And you could add whatever detail you want. So now in here we have image, roughness, and relief pattern. So I'm going to flip up to image. This is going to be our texture. So I'm going to go to my texture, and I'm going to go to wood planks. I'm going to do wood planks brown. I'm going to make them the same size, which was 30 inches. 30 inches. And now for roughness, we have two options. For roughness, we can use, if we're going to make a really reflective material, we actually might want to use our reflective channel. So let me go in here. So if you want your wood to be highly reflective, I'm going to wood blanks, you would use the specular channel, which is this one here. If you don't, and you want it to be just rough and not polished, for example, you would actually use the rough channel. So for reflectiveness, I'm actually going to use this because, again, I want to show you, I want to really pull out the reflectiveness so you can really see what it's doing here in the bumps. So I just need to make sure that the size is the same, so it needs to be 30 inches by 30 inches. Click done. And so you'll immediately start seeing something happen here. But now what we need to do is we need to add our bump in. And this is the really cool part. So many of you may have downloaded textures from different sources, and you got this normal map. And if you guys have ever used Twinmotion or Lumion or any gaming software, Unity, Unreal, whatever, you'll know that they actually are using these blue channels that you see here instead of the bump map that we're normally used to seeing, which is something like this. So now you can actually do that in Revit, which is super cool. So if I replace this image, I'm under normal map now. I'm sorry, I'm under the bump map, under relief pattern. And I go to wood planks and I hit this. If you just left this as is, it's not going to act the way you want it to. Because remember, it's looking for a white and black contrasted image. But way at the bottom here now, you'll notice for the data type, we can actually flip from a height map to a normal map now. And immediately you saw that reflection update change here. And we can change the depth amount to whatever we want. So if I crank this way up, you could see it's really going crazy, and I'm just going to keep cranking it up for the sake of over exaggerating. So now I was able to use my specular map, my diffuse, which is really our texture, and then now I'm able to actually use a normal map by flipping that out. And now if I click close and apply, you'll notice this one's going to be extremely reflective. So let me jump back into Enscape. Let's see what we just created. So there we have it. So as you can see here, we have our original texture over here, and there's our extremely reflective texture. So I hope you guys take something away from this. I know I did when I first learned how to do it. I think it's really cool. You have to be in Revit version 2019 or 2020 to use these, but the key there is making sure that you're replacing the asset with an asset that accepts the realistic the PBR material. So hope you guys like this. It was a quick tip or tutorial for today. If you did, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to everyone later.